Hello everybody, this is Ray, and in this video we will be continuing our rebuttal series on Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility. In the last episodes, we covered the author's note and the introduction. Now we're going to jump into chapter 1. Now you may notice that I'm wearing the same clothes as I was in the last episode, but I have a crawler and my wife and kid are gone this evening, so while they're away, the house is as quiet as it's gonna get, and this is the perfect time to be making videos en masse. So how you watch your Netflix series is how I'm making these videos. Hope you enjoy that. So let's just dive into chapter 1. It is called The Challenge of Talking to White People About Racism. Alright, so second sentence. I have a white frame of reference and a white worldview, and I move through the world with a white experience. My experience is not a universal human experience. It is a particularly white experience in a society in which race matters profoundly. So this is postmodernism. The idea that there is no objective truth, and so postmodernism denies an objective truth, an absolute truth, in favor of personal experience. So here she's saying that her experience is dictated by her white race. So her white skin gives her a world view that gives her a white experience. So this is not biblical, of course. As Christians, we see the world through a Christian worldview. We see the world as being made by God and accountable to God. We don't see a division between white and black. We see a division between saved and unsaved, sheeps and goats, wheat and shaft. These are the divisions in the Bible that matter, really. Another one, in this world you're either controlled by God or controlled by Satan. You're under one of their spheres of influence. And that's how a Christian sees the world. So she sees the world as white versus black. In this case, with critical theory, she sees the world through all sorts of other divisions, but in this book, we're mostly going to be dealing with critical race theory. Like most white people raised in the United States, I was taught not to see myself in racial terms, and certainly not to draw attention to my race or to behave as if it mattered in any way. This is how white parents teach their kids not to be racist. They just teach them not to care about race, even their own race. Now, part of being white is not care about the fact that you're white. That's just how I feel about being white, and no one really, no white people that I know, or at least regularly hang out with, care about the fact that they're white. Again, I hang out with a lot of people that have a Christian worldview, and that's what we care about. That is where our identity is, not our race, not our skin color. Cross-racial skill, new word. That's a new word for us. Our opinions are uninformed. This is a very nice section here. And white people's opinions on racism tend to be very strong. Well, most people have strong opinions about race. We must be willing to consider that unless we have devoted intentional and ongoing study to our opinions are necessarily uninformed, even ignorant. Now, this is where you see that kind of elitism come out. She has this knowledge, this special knowledge. This is a gnostic argument she's making. The argument that she's making is that she has this special knowledge on race that you don't have. That you can't get unless you do all this work that she's done. And I don't think that's true. That's certainly not true. I also believe that the Bible gives us a foundation to understand race. She would disagree. I also think you don't need to be a diversity trainer to understand these things. You don't need to be black to understand these things. I think you can objectively understand racial issues without doing her type of study. Moving on. Here. Racial knowledge, new term for us. So now she's just talking about challenges of white people getting racial knowledge and certain things that keep the racial hierarchy in place. These forces would include ideologies of individual and racism. There's a lot more on this list. Now, here is where she departs from being a Gnostic for a second to being a Marxist. This is an extremely Marxist view where she says that individualism and meritocracy are part of this white system of racism. And, that's not true. It's not racist to see people as individuals instead of seeing them by their pigment and their melanin levels. And meritocracy is a system where you get what you deserve. And this is a biblical system, really. In the Bible, we don't have karma. We don't have the what goes around comes around. Instead, we have sowing and reaping. A man reaps what he sows. So she doesn't believe that that's true. She thinks that belief in these two biblical ideals perpetuates the forces of racism. Interrupting the forces of racism is ongoing, lifelong work because the forces conditioning us into racist frameworks are always at play. Our learning will never be finished. So there's a lot of works that you have to do in order to overcome these systems. There's never really an end. At least not one that she's being upfront about. Then she goes on to say, being taught to treat everyone with respect and treating everyone the same. These are ideals that just kill conversations. And if you say these things, then you're not really interested in learning more about race. Okay, and here we're going to talk about socialization, how white people are trained to act. A significant aspect of what the white script, as in like white people are all handed this script that they're supposed to read, derives from seeing ourselves as both objective and unique. To understand white fragility, we have to begin to understand why we cannot fully be either. We must understand the forces of socialization. So she says that white people cannot be objective or unique. I take issue with both of those statements. You can look at the passages about spiritual gifts. Each one is given each Christian is given spiritual gifts. God sees us as unique, as fearfully and wonderfully made. God has a purpose for us. And, she says, nah, you're not unique. And then she says we can't be objective, which I disagree with. As Christians, we can be objective. Because God's standard is objective. And while we can't fully, we can't be God, we can't 100% have perfect judgment, which would be objective. But this is a standard that we are to strive for. And I'm going to read out of Matthew chapter 7. Do not judge so that you will not be judged. For in the same way you judge, you will be judged. And by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. So that's Matthew 7, 1 and 2. And, if someone is judging with racism, so if they're judging someone for being black, this verse is talking about how that measure of judgment that they're applying on someone else will be applied to them. So as Christians, I do think it's possible to not judge with unfair measures. I also think that because this is a command, it must, to some capacity, be possible. And as far as like race goes, I think it's completely possible to be objective on race, which she does not. Moving on, we make sense of perceptions and experiences through our particular cultural lens. This lens is neither universal nor objective. So here we're going back into postmodernism, where she's denying absolute truth in favor of personal experience. And she's saying our personal experience is neither universal nor objective, because we see everything by our demographics, by the groups that we belong to. Basically, we're not really people, we're just parts of groups. So individualism claims that there are no intrinsic barriers to individual success, and that failure is not a consequence of social structures but comes from individual character. Well, yeah, here we're going back on the Marxism, heavy on the Marxism, meaning you succeed because of the system and you fail because of the system. Your individual character does not have any impact on whether you will succeed or fail. That's basically the argument she's making right here. And, I don't believe that. America is certainly a testimony to this not being the case. We have a very high income mobility in this country, which proves that individualism exists, is a real thing, as is meritocracy for that matter. And then she goes on a rant about Bill Gates' son having a level of opportunities. And then she kind of claims that, this is an unearned advantage. I kind of take issue with that because, what I provide for my child is an earned advantage. I earned it. I might be passing it down to her. She might not have worked for it, but it was still earned. Jesus earned our salvation. Now, it is a free gift, and we did not earn it. We can't earn it. But that doesn't mean it was unearned in and of itself. It was earned, just not by us. And that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to inherit wealth. It's good on parents to leave their kids with something. Okay, so now she lists a lot of a lot of oppressed groups and all that. And she says these groups matter. I just wanted to point it out that missing from this list of demographics was religion. We're going to see that in this book. She doesn't mention religion a whole lot. There's like a handful of times. So it just goes to show that she has a very atheistic framework. Religion's not really on her radar. Okay, some new words for us. Racial frames. So going back to that postmodernism, where you see the world through your lenses, frames. Going back to the whole glasses metaphor. Racial frames is probably the made up term she uses the most in this book. Racial frames. And then, these frames give us racial viewpoints, a new word for us as well. Then we have racial socialization. Racial norms, that's more of a sociological term. That's not super original. But, she just loves adding the word racial to a lot of things. For many people, the mere title of this book will cause resistance because I am breaking the cardinal rule of individualism. I am generalizing. No, that is not generalizing. She's not generalizing by saying white people being defensive is white fragility. That's basically the premise of her book. If you are defensive about being called a racist, you are being fragile white. You are exercising white fragility. That's basically what the book is about. She's not generalizing. This is universalizing. Generalizing is like a stereotype, right? Asians are good at math. That's a generalization. A universalization is saying all Asians are good at math. There's a difference between the two. And she's saying the latter, but about white people in this book on white fragility. So, let's see. Racial humility, that's a new word for us. White people need to have racial humility. That's the message there. So Italian Americans were able to become white, and how assimilation has shaped his experience in the present as a white man. So Italians didn't start out as white, she claims, but they became white. She goes on to later explain in chapter 2 how race is a social construct. We'll get to that in the next video. But notice she says that you can become white. Your group can become white. She never decides to say, hey, what if black people can become white? What if they can be seen as white? She never ever suggests that that's a solution to this problem. I just wanted to point that out here. Because she believes that race is a social construct. So why can't everyone be white if it's a social construct? She doesn't suggest that that's a solution at all. And as a sociologist, I'm quite comfortable generalizing. Actually, she's universalizing. Hold on, I just want to go. But I understand my generalizations may cause some defensiveness for white people about whom I am generalizing. Again, universalizing. Given how they cherish the ideology of individualism, because they're not Marxist, is in our culture. I am white and have X experience. How does X shape me as a result of also being white? Setting aside your sense of uniqueness is critical. Is a critical skill, probably as in critical race theory, that will allow you to see the big picture of the society in which we live. Individualism will not. So here's an argument against individualism. Now I want you to replace critical here with Marxist. Setting aside your sense of uniqueness is a Marxist skill that will allow you to see the big picture of the society in which we live. Individualism will not. And the sentence has the same meaning. She is making a extremely Marxist argument there. If your definition of racist is someone who holds conscious dislike of people because of race, then I agree that it is offensive for me to suggest that you are racist when I don't know you. I also agree that if this is your definition of racism and you are against racism, then you are not a racist. Now breathe. I am not using this definition of racism. She actually does go on to define racism in the next chapter. It would have been useful to have defined racism in chapter 1, but she does not. And here is actually a very important line, because she will repeat this. I am not saying that you are immoral. So she goes on multiple times in this book to say that being racist doesn't make you a bad person. Because, according to Marxism, human nature is basically good. People are not bad. Systems are bad. That's, now Marxism doesn't have the monopoly on believing that human nature is good, but as you see, she believes human nature is good, so she does not blame the individual for their actions. She blames the system. Let's see. And it looks like that is all we got for today. Oh, make sure you, to increase your racial stamina that counters white fragility, we must reflect on our whole identities and our whole racial group identity in particular. For white people, this means first struggling with what it means to be white. So, as you see in this chapter, it was a vehemently Marxist chapter. And she uses the word racial stamina again, doesn't define what it means. Again, she doesn't define that until the end of the book, or at least context clues. I don't know what racial stamina means with the context clues here, but let's see. And then our identity is in our group. It's not in ourselves. It's not, my identity is in Christ, but I am viewed as an individual apart from that. I don't view myself as white. I don't view myself as male. These things are both true, but my identity is in Christ. So that's all we got for chapter 1. I hope this rundown was useful. As we see that, the ideas in White Fragility are antithetical to a biblical worldview. So that's all I got for this video here. Like and subscribe so you can catch the next one. Leave a comment below. My name's Ray, and this is the Evangelical Dark Web.